So we are going to use this scene here as our scene to play with real flow a little bit just to get used to it. It's a very simple scene. It's a fire hydrant. We got some sidewalks. We got the sort of road here, and then we have some curbs that go along there. And then I have a sky dome light in there. When you download this, the link to the file is in the video description down below. When you download this file, the HDR map that I use is not going to be in here because I don't own it, and it's very easy to go find it. It's up on HDRI Haven. If you should, most people should know that by now. So that's where you can find that. I forget what it's called here. It's called Mall Parking Lot 4K.hdr. It really doesn't matter. That's just for the final lighting. It can be whatever you want. Okay, then I have a camera that's locked in place on the scene, and set the focal length and whatnot. Uh, I'm not trying to match the background perfectly. I just need something that's going to look decent when it's rendered. Okay, so we just have a few things in here. So what we're going to try to do here is come into Real Flow here. What we're trying to make is this scene right here. It's just very basic, very simple. Fire hydrant pouring water out. Okay, so pretty straightforward, but there are things that you need to know before you can successfully complete a scene like this. Even as I look at it now, I'm seeing errors, but that's me. But that's what we're going to do. And then once we've done this, we're going to then bring it back into Maya to shade and then render. Okay, so that's what we're going for here. All right, so first thing we need to do is make a new project here in RealFlow. It'll remove all the data. So again, you go to new, tell it where you want to save it, and then save it there. So just give it a name and then save it there. It's going to give you an empty scene. Now I've already created mine, I think. Yep, here it is. So I have now an empty scene as my grid, shortcut G. Okay, so we need to come into my here and export all this stuff out. And there's two ways that you can do your exports. The first way is just simply doing an OBJ and calling it good. And that's fine. Because we're going to be working with wet maps and what have you, these here, where's my UV editor? Right here. Everything's UV'd, so that's UV'd, and the curves themselves are UV'd. It's each separate curve like that. The fire hydrant is not UV'd because I don't really need it to be. Obviously, if I was going to use this in a film of some kind, so it's not UV'd. If I was going to use it in an actual project, I would obviously UV it and get it looking nice. But for this is fine. I need the UVs here because I want to generate wet maps for when the water touches the surface. I want the surface to get wet, and the way that we do that is using a mask that is created by RealFlow dynamically as particles hit the surface. So the parts that you're going to be doing that with need to be UV'd, which is why they are here. Okay, so exporting again. Very simple to just do an OBJ export. The only thing you got to remember is that with OBJs, let me switch to my perspective here. With OBJs, if you're going to export, you need to triangulate your meshes. Now, all these are quads, as you can see, which is good for working in Maya, but when you go to RealFlow, everything needs to be triangulated. So the simple way to do that. Now, actually, before we do that, looking at this fire hydrant and the faceting that we have going on here, because it's a pretty low resolution sort of circle here. You got to be careful with that because if it's too faceted, you'll probably see that in the water. The water will be sort of bumping up against the faceting here, and you'll get the tube of water coming out of there will have that faceting in it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a smooth on here, just to smooth this to give me more resolution. And if you really want to, you can set it up to 2 divisions to really get this nice and round. Okay, and then when that's done, to export, you can simply, I'm going to select. Well, let's do if you're going to do it as OBJs, then you probably want to break them up here. So I'm going to do. So let's go. Where's my modeling? Yeah, we're in modeling. We'll go to mesh and triangulate. So it's very simple. You see that it all becomes triangles. So again, it's under mesh and triangulate. Okay, then we can export this. So export selection in wherever you're saving it. We'll call this hydrant. Okay, And actually, if you're, since we've already made the RealFlow project here, if we come up in our scene here, what we can do is make a folder called objects, because objects is where it expects to find these. So I'm going to put them in objects, call it hydrant.obj, and then I'm going to do the sidewalk and the curbs together just because they are on the same UV map. These ones are the sidewalk and there's the actual road there. The curbs themselves are separate, so I'm going to do those separate. So again, what I can do here is just, I don't really need to smooth this because it's just a flat plane. If there was more detail to it, I probably would. So again, mesh, triangulate. Okay, so now it's been triangulated. Then we can export selection, and we'll just call this road. And then, of course, our curbs here, we could do the same thing here. And let's see here. Mesh, triangulate. Okay, so now they're triangles. And then do another export selection. And we'll just call this curbs. Okay, so there we have that. Then we can come into RealFlow and do an import object. And you'll see that it automatically went to that objects folder. Okay, so that's a good place to put. You don't have to. Obviously, you can search around till you find this stuff. It doesn't really matter. You can only import one thing at once. So let's start with the road. So there's our road right there. I'm gonna hit 0 to smooth shade everything. Okay, and then let's go again. Import object, and we'll do the hydrant. And that'll pop up over there. Okay, and then import object, and we'll do the curbs. Okay, so that is one way. I'm going to hit G just to hide that grid for a minute here. Everything's triangulated. You won't get an error. If you did not triangulate the meshes, RealFlow would tell you that it can't import those objects because it needs triangles. So the other way to export here, so I'm going to undo all this. You want to make sure that you don't bake in that triangulation, right? Because for your final meshes, you don't want them triangulated. You want them still to be quads. So let's just make sure. And also, don't bake in your smooth here in your history. Just be careful with that. Okay. So the other way to do it is, and this is probably a faster, easier way, is just to select everything all at once. And we're going to use the RealFlow plugin, right? If you work on a Mac, they don't make this plugin for you, so you would have to do it the OBJ method. If you are working on a PC, then you can download the plugin for Maya, and you can do it this way. So SDs. So right here, these first two buttons, you can see it's an arrow going to the left with SD, and this one is this little gear wheel here. So that is your options. So this is where you tell it what to export and where. So it automatically defaults that objects folder, and say you want to call this hydrant scene, right? It's going to export as an SD, and then you playback range. It's assuming there's animation, so this honestly doesn't matter. You can leave this on or turn it off. Doesn't really matter. If you don't want it to use your timeline range here, you can turn this off and then specify your own. So either way, I'm just going to leave it there. Export selected. So you don't want to export everything in the scene. You just wanted to export the stuff you've selected. Okay, so export selected is on. If you have something that's deforming, say you've got a rigged character that's animated that needs to interact with water or whatever that you want to bring into RealFlow, then you would check on export deformation. And then use active camera is, if you had a scene that was that had a moving camera or whatever in it, and you wanted to do your simulation according to that camera, then you could turn that on. It really doesn't matter. I leave that on. It's going to take, it's either going to take the camera or the perspective camera. Doesn't matter. Then persistent options just tells it to remember all these settings. Then you can hit export. It's going to go through because it's using the time range here, and then generate the thing. So next time you want to export anything, now that you've set your settings and turned on persistent options, all you got to do is hit this button here, and it's going to do all that with one click. Okay, so then it's the same thing. You just go to import object, and there's our scene right there, and you import that, and then you're good to go. It's going to bring everything in for you. Okay, so either way, so since I've already done this, I'm going to stick with the OBJs, but either way will work just fine. So this is what we have here. We have a hydrant, we have a road, and we have the curbs. And again, everything is connected to a hub by default. Okay, this means that pretty much anything I create is going to be hooked into this hub, which means that everything is going to be connected to everything else. That's what the hub does. It's just a connecting point for everything. So honestly, I don't particularly like that myself. I like to make my own connections. Understand though, if you do it without the hub, then you need to remember to make all the right connections. So it's very easy to forget a connection, whereas the hub is going to just do it automatically. Anytime you create anything, it's going to be plugged into the hub. So keep that in mind. Maybe if you're still new to the software, maybe leave the hub in there. But I'm going to show you how to get it so it doesn't make a hub. If you go here to edit, add, and turn off add to default hub, then it will no longer do that. So now when you make stuff, so I'm just going to make a random cube. Notice how it's no longer automatically attached to my hub. Now, there's people that use they add their own hubs. If you want to add another hub, you can add another one right there, this button right here. Hubs are useful for certain things, but having it automatically hook into the hub is something that I don't personally do. Okay, so I turn that off. Now I make my own connections. So what we need to think about here now, if we go back to Maya real quick, and let's go in one of the other views here, like this view. Okay, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 centimeters tall. Okay, if we go back to real flow, and let's go in one of these views, I'm going to hit G to turn on my grid. Let me get rid of my cube here. I didn't need that. This is also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares tall. Difference is in real flow, these are meters. So these are 1 by 1 meter squares. So that's something you got to be careful of. So obviously our scale is way too big. This is an 8-meter tall fire hydrant. That's a humongous fire hydrant. Okay, so I'm gonna turn it down a little bit. So what I'm gonna do is set my geometry scale to like 0.2. Okay, so that is what, a fifth? So now instead of being 8 meters tall, it's actually about 1.5, which is still kind of crazy. Let's go 0.1. Okay, so we're less than a meter tall. I don't know what hydrants are, but I don't think I've ever seen a hydrant that was a meter tall. So I think this will probably be good. A tenth of it. So it's less than a meter tall now. And so again, you don't have to worry about, you don't have to go outside and go find a hydrant to measure so you get it perfect. If you get it close enough, it'll be fine. It doesn't have to be super duper perfect. Okay, so I'm going to go with this. Ooh, I'm using my shortcuts here. So let's go hit 4 to get back here. So we're a lot smaller now. We should be at a much better scale. Okay, so usually what I'll do right off the bat is just make my daemons. So go into daemons, and daemons are the different things that can act on your particles, like gravity and so forth. So let's throw gravity in there. I'm going to throw a kill volume in there so I can tell it which one of my particles to kill once they get past a certain point. And then my own personal preference, I like to put a little drag force in there to add a little air resistance sort of feel to it. Okay, and there we go. So these right now do not have to be hooked up to my my geometry. The geometry is not dynamic. It's not. It doesn't need to fall under gravity. It doesn't need kill volumes. It doesn't need a drag force. So I'm not going to hook this in. This is why I like to. I'm actually going to delete this. This is why I like to not have the hub in here, because I don't have to make that connection. Whereas the hub, once you do that, pretty much it is all connected. Okay, so then I got to decide what kind of emitter I'm going to use. And for this, I'm going to use the standard particles. So we're going to go here, standard particles, and we're going to use a circle. Okay, and of course the circle, because I'm at a lower scale, is pretty big. So I'm going to scale this down. Just hit R to get into scale mode, scale it down. And let's try to position this in the mouth of that fire hydrant. So if it's hard to select the viewport, you can just select it right down here in the relationship editor. So What you might think would be a good idea is to put this in here like this. And let's get a little bit closer, scale it down some more. Okay, you might think it'd be a good idea to have it looking like this. Obviously, the water is going to go forward. The problem is, as we illustrated as I illustrated in the previous video, is by default the water comes out of here not looking very good. And so with the circle here, because I am at such a low scale, my resolution is going to produce very few particles. I'm going to save here, and then I'm going to run a simulation. And you can see it basically produces a single stream. I don't know if you can see those very well in the video. So let's reset that. We're going to have to turn this resolution up pretty high. So let's go 50 and save it again. And then let's simulate. So we're getting something a little bit better now. Still not great. Okay. Let's go to 100. Let's reset and simulate. Okay. So a little bit better. Little bit better now. Okay, so you can see how this is a very sort of unrealistic tube. Now obviously I have not attached my gravity, so let's go ahead and just attach all this. So gravity, if you want to make connections, if you try to drag, if you click on where the name of the node is, it's going to drag the node. If you want to make the connection, you got to click on this little icon, and then you can drag there to there. And another way you can do it, so if you want to connect all of these to something, what you can do is put an actual hub in here. Now, this is where I use hubs to my advantage. I can hook these into the hub, and then I can connect this to the hub, and it's the same thing. That way I only need to make one connection every time if I need to hook to all three of these. So that's a good way to use hubs. Okay, so now we have that. Let's reset and simulate. And you can see now we're falling by gravity. And of course, because our little kill volume is this small, it's going to cut off my particles. So I'm going to stop the simulation. I'm going to reset it. And the trick is to make the kill volume just big enough for what you need. Don't make it super huge, again, because if particles can go for miles before they hit the edge of that kill volume, it's just not very efficient for you simulation-wise. So we want to make it just big enough for what we need here. So let's see how this works right here. We don't need to cover the entire scene because honestly, all the water is going to be spilling right in here. So we just need a kill volume big enough for that. Okay, so that way any particles that happen to get punted off into space get killed as soon as they hit that kill volume. Okay, so that should be fine there. Obviously with this big old icon here on the kill volume, that's distracting. So right here inside of the kill volume parameters, show icon, turn that off, and that'll hide that. And let's do that for the gravity as well, because that's also distracting. And let's do it for the drag force. Okay, gravity and drag force, you don't need to move and position anywhere because they're universal. They affect everything. You can set them to bounded, which will turn them into so you can have a square bound, and you can see this is now the bounds within my drag force works. I don't want to do that. I just need it to be constant. So I'm going to say, oh wait, that wasn't it. That was, no, there we go. Okay, so this is what we have now. So to avoid this sort of tube-like uninteresting tube of water here, one way to do it is to turn up your VNH random, right? And that's going to try to randomize up particles as they come out of the emitter. The other thing you can do is just take this and rotate it about 180 degrees backward. So it's emitting into the hydrant before those particles come out. Okay, what this is going to do, it's going to smash these particles against the inside wall of that hydrant. You can see it's closed off in there, but you will smash those particles against there. And actually what I might do is even like rotate it off to the side here, so things are not perfectly straight. There's going to be some angle and things are going to have to bounce off at weird angles. And what that's going to do, it's going to bounce the water off the back wall before it gets forced out, right? Eventually there's going to be too many particles to keep in there, so water is going to have to come out the front. It's going to cause the particles that are bouncing off the back wall to then collide with the particles that are freshly coming out of the emitter, and it's going to churn everything up. And because it's going to keep adding more water, it's going to have to force everything out the front of the emitter, and you're going to get much nicer shapes in the water. Okay, so let's save that and let's do a little simulation here. And oh, see, so what I forgot to do here, of course, is connect these guys into my emitter. So again, just to make things easy, I'm going to hook my geometry into this hub here, and then I'm going to hook this into here. So let's reset. So now instead of making 3 connections to my water here, I just need to make the 1. So let's go ahead and reset. Let's save, and then let's simulate. Okay, so what we're getting some very interesting shapes in the tube of water here, right? And right now, if we select our circle emitter, and by the way, notice how RealFlow, even though it's simulating, I can still rotate around it. RealFlow is written very nicely. If you simulate anything in Maya, Maya pretty much locks up the interface while it's simulating. With RealFlow, the interface is still very responsive. I can rotate around here, even at much higher particle counts. You can still pretty easily rotate around the scene. It's actually very nice. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's stop our simulation right now. So right now, if we look at the circle settings here for the emitter, and, we can rename this guy here. We could call this Hydrant emitter. So you just double click in there and you can rename it. So there's the circle emitter. Right now it's a speed of 2, so the water is kind of falling pretty quick. If we turn this up to like 5 or something like that, we're going to get much faster emission. And the speed is the attribute that you use when you want to shut off the water completely. Just set it to 0 and nothing's going to emit. So and if you turn it up real high, you get that fire hose effect. So it's actually pretty cool. And then also with our geometry here, by default, when we brought it in, let's see, where is that? Okay, come on. I always forget where this setting is. Here we go. My goodness. Volume mode, solid inside. So because this is it's a sealed object, meaning it's airtight. Therefore, it's got volume. So that is set to solid inside. And same with the curves. Now the ground plane here is not, but it still sets the volume inside. So you got to be careful sometimes, and you can actually see it. There's a particle. See if I can get a good. Let's hit 3 on the keyboard. There we go. So there's a particle here that has managed to go through the floor. Okay, that's because there's no thickness here. So the collisions are done on this plane here, and it's very easy for things to get through. So far we haven't had an issue. And if we do later, then we can always replace the floor with something that's been thickened. So we'll go with it for right now, and we'll see what happens. So far just 1. That's fine. I'm not going to worry too much about it. But if a whole bunch of particles are making it through the floor, that's when I might have a problem with it. So I'm going to hit 4 to get back out to the perspective view. Okay, so we've turned up our speed here. Let's go ahead and reset. And, while I'm at it, let me go ahead and increase our resolution again. Let's go to 50. You know what? Let's go 500. Let's go big or go home. So some of these settings here, while we're at it. So density, water has a density of, 1,000 kilograms per meter cubed. So that is the density of water. RealFlow sort of baseline is water. If you're trying to do different kinds of fluids, you need to do your homework and research what the density of the, if you're doing honey or if you're doing, gasoline or whatever it is, you got to do the research to get the settings there. And then internal, external pressure, we're going to leave viscosity. For me, the viscosity of 3 is always too high. So usually I'll just turn this to 1. It's a thickness of, so if you're doing honey, you're going to have a very high viscosity. If you're doing like toothpaste. That's a very high viscosity. So for water, I'm going to turn it down to 1. 3. 3 always seems like too much for me here. And anytime you want to learn anything about any of these, just click in there and then hit not one F1, and it'll tell you what it does. And if you need more info, you can just click on here. It's going to open the entire help doc. Okay, so I'm gonna run this sim here. I'm gonna hit save, and then I'm gonna run this, and I'll be back. Okay, so what we're getting is this here. Now this is all sort of split up, and likely it's because my speed on my emitter is pretty high. So let's take this down to 3.5, and then also my scale might be just a little too small because I might have to really crank the resolution here. So, you can do that. You could also try to raise the scale. I know that it's going to sort of make it less realistic, but you may not, you may or may not be able to notice. So what I'm going to do, you kind of have to figure out how to maneuver this. So let's go to I don't know, 0.35 scale. So everything's going to grow a little bit, and of course all the geometry and stuff will grow, but the gravity and everything else is going to stay the same scale. So now I have to take my kill volume and just enlarge that. Okay, so this is going to have to be quite a bit bigger now. Okay, so you kind of have to play with these settings. It's not about hyper realism. It's about what looks good. It might be the wrong scale, but if it looks good, it looks good. That's kind of what you're going for. So it's not, we're not engineers. We're not interested in perfect numerical values and whatnot. We're interested in what looks good as artists. So you just do what you can. So, and then I'm going to take my emitter, which is now too low. I'm going to reset this here. And I'm going to bring this up and back a little bit now. Obviously, again, it's too small now. So we're going to scale it up. Just using the Maya, same as Maya here, hit 4. So let's face this over here. Okay, you'll notice that this interface is actually really sensitive if you're coming from Maya, so that might be a little weird. Okay, so now we're at a little bigger scale. Let's see what we get from that. Okay, so I've saved and I'm going to simulate, and I'll be right back. Okay, so as you can see, because I did not alter my resolution to lower it down, now that I have a bigger emitter, it's at a 500 resolution at this much bigger size. So now we got way more particles. You see I have 96,000 particles in this simulation. Again, that might seem like a lot. It really isn't. If I was doing a final sim, this would be a lot higher than that. But now we're getting, look at these interesting shapes we're getting in here. Okay. So that's looking pretty nice. All right, so that's the particles as they're coming out right now. Again, from a distance, it looks pretty thick, but as soon as you get pretty close, you can see that there's still quite a bit of space between particles. And if you're doing a final sim, you'd want to really fill that in. Now look at all the shapes I'm getting in here. This is actually, you see how there's particles sort of splashing all over the place, and that's because there's it's sort of like a violent collision going on the inside of that fire extinguisher, and it's expelling those particles with a lot of force, which is why some of them are able to break away on their own, which is also why we're getting some of these really nice shapes. So by doing that, it just helps sort of push the sort of the violence of that water under high pressure coming out of that, because if you've ever seen a hydrant sort of go off, that's really high pressure water there. So being able to get that to look like that is really nice. Okay, so that looks fine and all, but if you've been simulating this at a resolution of 500, you'll notice that it is taking quite a while. So why don't we try a different type of emitter? Let's try the diverso particles. This is nice, but it's pretty. I mean, honestly, it's I don't know, it's probably taking me a few minutes to get these 18 frames out. And if you let this run overnight, it'll be done in maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. So it's really not that bad for what we're doing. If we were doing something really much bigger, then you'd want to probably use the diverso. But let's go ahead and try with the diverso particles. This one is pretty simple, this emitter and how it works. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And I'm going to reset my sim here. Okay. Now, one thing I want to get into before we go into simulate anything else, if you hit F12, it opens up what is called Export Central. And I think, I never remember where it is because I just hit F12. There it is. Export Central. Okay. So if you come in here, you'll see that we have under objects, it lists the objects that we have in the scene. And there's no checkboxes in there. So this is if you want to export any part of that. So if this hydrant was getting knocked over dynamically or whatever by particles, you could check this on here and tell it what kind of format you want to send out, and it would save that animation for you. It's got this animation.sd here, which saves the animation of anything that's part of your objects. In our case, we don't have our actual objects aren't being animated, so I'm going to turn this off and this cache BDC because these are getting saved by default. And what they look like, if I can find that here, is under, so in our folder here, we have, let's see, where is it put? Is it under objects? Yeah, there we go. It's under objects. This is that cache.bdc, and it's a file per frame. So generally, I don't use those. And then also the animation.sd. I don't need that because none of my objects are animated in this scene. So I can delete that and uncheck that. Okay. So when you create an emitter, so we can hit done here. So now we can make our diverso, and let's use a circle again. So circle, and notice that it immediately made its own domain. So if you don't make the domain first and you just hit one of the emitters, it's going to put a domain in there for you and connect the emitter. So now again, we need to hook all these guys up to this domain. So we're just going to click that, do a single connection that way. And then we need to also hook the domain up to the objects because we want the fluid to actually react with the objects. So we'll do that there too. Notice that you know what? I did that wrong. I need to connect the domain to the objects. So there and there. Notice that with the standard particles, you just had one node, which was the emitter, and that was it. With hybrido and diverso particles, you have a domain, and then you have an emitter connected to the domain. So the particles exist in the domain, and the emitter is just a thing that pumps particles into that domain. So any collisions that you want to do have to happen with the domain, not the emitter. Okay, so that's a change there. So now I can take the emitter, and let's move that into position. So we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to rotate this way, move it down, scale it. Okay, and maybe have it at a bit of an angle again, just so that anything we can do to just churn up that water and make everything bounce off itself there. Okay, so again there, and if I hit F12 again to get to Export Central, you'll see that now there's a diverso domain, and it's checked. And then it's going to tell you what kind of files it's going to send. So if you like to use Alembic files, Maya does support Alembic files. You can turn on Alembic. If you don't have the RealFlow plugin, like if you're working on a Mac, then you want to turn on Alembic because you can bring those in as Alembic files. If you do have the Mac, then you can, if you do have the plugin, so the plugin is this tab right here. And if we go into Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and let's do a search for RealFlow. There it is. So there's the plugin there. So if you do have the plugin, then you can use the RPC files. Okay, so that's fine there. So you got to make sure that that's turned on. It is by default. That's why you get the cache files. If you turn this off, it's not going to give you cache files. Okay, so bear that in mind. This is where you tell it exactly what you want to output from your scene. So I'm going to hit OK here. And now also what we want to do is set some of these here. So again, random V and H random, I'm just going to turn those up. I'm going to turn my speed, what did I say, 3.5 earlier. Let's go with 3.5. Might not be exactly the same between the two emitter types, but let's try 3.5 and see what we get. Then we can go in the domain. So because this is split into an emitter and domain versus the standard being just an emitter with all the settings, a lot of the settings for this are in the domain. So resolution. Let's go ahead and let's try 50 and see what we get. And I think I'm going to leave everything else as it is. And let's see what we get. So I'm gonna run this, and I'm gonna pause the video while it does it because it's probably gonna take a minute here. Although it probably wouldn't take that long, but I'm gonna pause this and then come back when I have something. Okay, so this is what we're getting. Not very good, right? We got water that is actually pouring out of the hydrant right through the nozzle here, and then we have another problem of the water going through. So obviously we got some things to fix up here. So first thing I want to start by doing is setting, so we have our domain here, have our resolution nice and high here. If we select the fire hydrant and look at under volume here, we have a cell size. So cell size is, it's like each of these objects are sort of surrounded by voxels, and the smaller the cell size, the more accurate those voxels are. So if we say drop this to 0.01, and this is in meters, if we drop this to 0.01, and then let's see what we get. So I'm going to reset this, and let's run it again. And you know, didn't really fix that too much. But on top of what we just did, if I then come up here to simulate this little arrow, just click on that, go to options, and click on the Diverso tab because we're using Diverso. Minimum and maximum substeps is how many times per frame that we're going to simulate. So I'm going to increase these numbers, say 5 and 10, for example, and then hit OK. Let's reset this and see what we get. We're just telling it to work a little harder. And you can see now we have a much cleaner simulation. Now what you notice though, even though we set this to a speed of 6, remember with the other one, a speed of 6 would have been really fast. So you can tell that between these two emitters, things are a little bit different. So if I want to speed it up, we can set this to, let's try 12 and see what we get here. And a little bit faster. So this one is not very sensitive at all. So let's go big here. Let's go 100 to reset, and let's simulate that. Okay, so 100 is crazy. So let's reset that. Let's go 25. Okay, so a lot of fluid simulation is just messing with numbers, try to get things to do what you want them to do. So that's a little bit better. But again, we're still having this issue. Now we're having some weirdness here, so well, that's interesting. So I got to look into what's going on there. Okay, but otherwise the water is pouring out really nicely. It's still going through this plane here, so we need to figure out a way to fix that. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so I figured out the issue. For some reason, the Diverso does not like the drag force, so I have disconnected that. So I'm just going to delete it for now. Might as well just get rid of it then. Didn't seem to like it, so what was causing it to go weird under there, you can see now it's just falling straight down as you'd expect. So now let's go deal with this issue here. So what the problem is there is that, let's go into Maya here. Again, these are just planes, and it's very hard to get collisions right when you're just dealing with a plane. So let's go ahead and thicken these. So what I'm going to do is actually just duplicate these so I'm not messing up the original ones. So let's start with the road here. I'm just going to select them both and hit Control 1 to hide everything else but those. So Control E just to extrude, and I'm just going to extrude down like this to give this thickness. And it got reversed, so I'm going to go to Mesh Display and reverse. Okay, that's what we have there. Now don't worry about texture stretching or anything like that. These are just going to be used for simulation, nothing else. Okay, so then these, let's grab these. Now these are probably going to be a little bit trickier because of this little corner here. But if we control E and start to thicken, you can see what's going to happen in that corner. So what I'm going to do is just do a little bit like this. And then what I'm going to do is try to deselect these ones here. So I've deselected everything. And then do the same on this side. So let's go ahead, let's see, get a better angle here. Let's get rid of this. Okay, and then just hit W and pull this down and maybe just scale it outward like this. Okay, so now these are definitely thickened up. These are going to work much better. And I need to reverse the normals on this one. So mesh display reverse. Okay, I'm just going to delete history on them, and then I'm going to go to mesh, triangulate, okay, and then just export these separately here. So export selection, and we're going to call this road 2, okay, and then come in here and replace these. Now it's worth noting that if you imported these things as an SD, let me hit G to get rid of my grid. If you import these things as an SD, if you delete part of it, it's going to delete everything that came with the SD. So you'd have to re-export everything from Maya. All right, so we're going to just come here to import object, and we're going to call this road 2. And now we have that. It's thick, and we just want to make sure that the volume mode is set to solid inside. Okay, so let's reset this. And this road 2 here, if you don't have a default hub happening, I'm just going to hook this back up in here. Okay, so let's save our work. Oh, not that. Let's save. There we go. All right, so let's simulate, and let's see if now it's going to collide as we expect it to. And there we go. Okay, so Diverso just does not like thin objects. It likes the object to have some thickness to it, because now it won't penetrate that object. All right, so we're getting cut off obviously because of our domain right there, and we're getting a little bit of spillover over here. All right, so let's stop the simulation here and reset. Okay, now what you notice there, let me bring that back here. What you notice is that my fluids are just sliding across that floor very easily. Look how quickly that's just sliding across that floor. Okay, that's because our friction is very low on the floor. And this is one of the things that anytime I see a simulation done where the fluid hits a floor and then just slides across there like there's no resistance at all, it sort of destroys it for me. So we need to increase the friction on pretty much everything that's going to be coming into contact with the floor. Okay, so not with the flow, with the liquid. So let's right here, dy. Anything with dy means that it's the friction with the diverso particle. So dy for diverso. So 0.001 is always very low. So I'm going to set this to 0.01. Okay, and I'm going to do the same for the curves over here. Okay, so now we should get a much nicer movement of the water. So simulate. Okay, you can see the water is not quite sliding as fast across the objects. Okay, so let's stop this again. It looks like it could, again, just be increased a little bit more. So I'm going to select this again. Let's go, and well, let's try 0.1. It might be a little high, but let's see. And let's go 0.1. Okay, so these are now at 0.1. Let's reset, save, and run it again. Okay, so you can see the shape of the water is different now because that water is holding, that surface is grabbing that water a little easier. So we're not getting the water expanding quite as fast anymore. Okay, so it's just sort of going around the hydrant there. And you see that not nearly as much has spilled over. That's because that friction is really grabbing that water. It might be a little high. Um, Now, one thing you'll notice, you see how perfectly round this is. Okay, that is because the friction is the exact same all over the surface. Now, usually surfaces aren't like that. Usually some parts are slippery, more slippery than other parts. So what you can do, and I'm not going to do this in this example, but you could absolutely do it. If you come right here to dy friction, you see that there's a little checkerboard like in Maya if you're going to put a texture into something. If you right click and go to load texture, you can then attach a noise map of some kind in here. So if you make a noise map, say in Photoshop or whatever, you can bring it in here and then plug it into the surface. And you can even do an animated sequence of images. And you can plug that in there. And that's going to make it so that the surface is not uniformly the same amount of friction. It goes up and down, and you won't get this perfectly round. It'll have some noise in there. So that's something that you can do. I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go 0.05. Let's cut that in half. And the same for the hydrant. I don't, well, I could put a little bit. Let's go 0.025. And then the curbs themselves, 0.05. Okay, this is this is to taste. It's how you prefer. I am going to grab my kill volume here and just widen it a little bit this way and maybe a little bit this way as well. Okay, just because some of that water is pooling there. All right, so let's go ahead and simulate again. And I forgot to save, better not crash. Okay, that's not looking too bad. All right, so let's reset this. And let's go back in our emitter here. Let's try a speed of 35. I don't know. Save, simulate. Okay, it still seems pretty low here. So the Diverso seems to be, this is the one I haven't used as much as the other ones, so it seems to be a little finicky. So let's do 50 again, see if it'll freak out. Yeah, it seems to start and then slows back down. Okay, so we got a little bit more sort of spilling over here. All right, let's keep pushing it. Okay, so now we're having issues here because it's a little too fast. Now I wanna try. Let's reset here, and let's grab our emitter and just move it back a little bit and see if that's still gonna happen. Yeah, we're still getting some of that, so it's a little finicky. So maybe not so high. Let's try 60. So we're getting a little bit, but that seems to go away. And then, let's see. Okay, so we're getting a few more sort of drips. So what I'm gonna see if this will work here. I'm gonna come to simulate. Let's turn those settings up again, and let's go 7 and 20. Okay, you got to be careful. If you turn these up too high, your sim times are going to get ridiculous. Let's reset this. I'm going to save and simulate. Okay, so we're not getting any of that stuff back there. Still, our speed is not that great. But it looks like we're getting a higher volume of water, though. So we're getting there, slowly but surely. So we're definitely getting more water coming out. It's just the force of it is not really increasing. So let's try that 75 again and see. Now that we've increased our quality settings, let's see if it'll still do that weird thing back here. So looks like we're not getting that. So what I do like though is how the water is sort of breaking up here. That's nice. Okay, again, looks like we are getting overall more water coming out. It's not really doing it with a lot of force. And you can see that it's building up pretty quickly. And now start to spill over. Okay, let's reset that again. So, you know, you could play with this. Still 125. Let's see. Why not? Save. Let's simulate. Okay, so now again we're getting a little bit of this, which I think we can eliminate with upping those settings again. And let's see here. All right, so still kind of looking the same. All right, so wrong one here. Let's go back in here and I'm going to set my minimum to 10. And let's see if I leave my max at, well, let's go 25. Save. Okay, we're still getting that issue, although it goes away almost immediately. And a little bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, just so that I'm not doing this trial and error right now, is I'm gonna play with this, and then I will come back when I have it looking the way that I want. All right. Okay, so figured out the issue. Um, diverso particles apparently do not like that little trick of mine of shooting things back into the hydrant before they come out. So for some reason, I don't know what the issue is there. But when you face the emitter out the front of the hydrant, then that problem seems to go away. I can turn up the speed, and also I actually dropped my speed down to 20 because it was ridiculous once I turned it around. So I'm not really sure why that's a problem. I don't know if the the particles were getting absorbed in there and then just leaving not too many. But now it does. Just shoot them out. There you go. You learn something every day. So that was the issue. Okay. So to of course avoid that, then is I really turned up my VNH randoms here. And then another thing you can do is use, if we go to the daemons here and if we select our domain and apply this noise field, oh actually I guess I gotta attach it myself. So if I attach this here to my domain, and basically what I want to do, so I just add some turbulence to the simulation here. So let's enable fall off, say yes, and display fall off. And what I get is this box right here with an inner box and an outer box. So the fall off is between the inner and the outer. So I'm just going to sort of place this around where that fluid is being generated. As it is, it's a little big. If you turn on show field, so this is the field here, and you can see I've got lots of vectors going in different directions, and this is all going to affect the fluid. Now this is crazy. This is going to probably make our simulation insane. Let's go ahead and see what we get. So actually it's not too bad, but you can see there's slight differences there. So what we can do, here's the different things. You can set the strength. So if I set the strength to say 5, you can see that field becomes crazy. Let's see what that does. So you can see, and you can see that these things are actually changing every frame. So it's not just one constant. So we're getting some very interesting shapes here. It seems to have thinned it out over here though. But this is a good way to alter the shape. You can see we got some really nice splashing here, which has broken up that really round shape. Okay, so let's stop that and reset. Here's our fall off here. So if I decrease my fall off, you can see that as I get smaller and smaller and smaller, there's less there. And then what I can then also do is just take the whole thing and scale it down. Okay, so obviously our force is still kind of crazy here. So right here in our field here, magnitude scale. So if I drop this, say, to 0.1, those are going to become a lot smaller. And now let's see, I'm going to save, and let's see what effect that has. So now we have kind of craziness here. So it's probably because my strength is too high. I'm going to set this back to 1, and you'll see that those arrows recede even more. So let's go ahead and run this again. Okay, so there's a little sort of kick it off to the left a little bit, which I kind of actually like. So that will churn up the water right in there, and then avoid that sort of fake CG look to it. Okay, that's one way to do it. Then the other thing, of course, like I said before, we can in the floor. So let me stop this. In the floor here, it's very round. So what you can do is just put a noise map. So I just went into Photoshop and did some experimentation, and I used a bunch of filters like the under filter render clouds, and then I adjusted the contrast to make it really contrasty. Then I added like noise under filter noise. I think it was just add noise, and I added a Gaussian noise monochromatic just to give it more detail. And then whatever however you want to come up with a noise map is fine. So let's go back here and apply the map that I made. So just right click under DY friction, go to load texture, and let's see, where did I put this? I put this here, and here's the noise I want. So that's the image there. If I put it on, you'll see that it shows up in here. Let's see what that does. So for some reason, this is my other map that I made. For some reason, this pops on, but it's not actually using that. Again, this is just RealFlow doing some crazy stuff here. As soon as you start simulating it, it uses the correct map. So you can see we got some little breakup in the shape here. Still pretty round, just because there's not really much. It's just a perfectly flat surface is the problem. If you bring maybe a sculpted plane with some detail on the surface, then maybe you'll get better results. But just as a flat plane, even with this map, but I mean, it is having an effect. You can see what it's doing. And let's use the other map here just so we can really illustrate the point here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to use this one here, which basically I use a filter on that. And again, it's not showing the correct one, but now it is. I don't know what's going on with how it displays, but hold on. Let's see. Oh yeah, I want I'm gonna name this something else, I think, because I used these before. Let's call this big noise, just to change the names. Okay, there we go. So maybe it just doesn't like that their names are so similar. Oh, you know what? It's probably using them as a sequence of images. That's probably why. So let's do this. And this is obviously ridiculous. You would never use this, but I'm using this just to illustrate exactly what would happen. And you can actually see the water is actually following those lights. So that map does have a lot of effect. Where it's black, there's no or very little friction, and where it's sort of lighter white or whatever, then you have more friction. So you're getting some interesting shapes going on there. This is obviously kind of insane here, but you can see that this does actually work. So if you want to vary up your map, vary up your waters, how it reacts to the surface, this is a good way to do it. You have to do some trial and error to find a map that works really well. to get some breakup. I mean, this is much nicer, even though it's kind of unrealistic. I like that it's sort of broken up like that. So I'm going to turn this off, so just unload texture for right now. Actually, doesn't look too bad now that the map isn't there. So play with it. See how you wanna do that. Could be if you maybe sculpted your road asphalt texture in ZBrush or something like that, and it's bumpy, you could convert that to a black and white map or a height map, and then bring that in as your noise map. That'll work just fine. Okay, so whatever you can do to break up the CG-ness of it, right, is always going to be a good thing. Where the water emits from, if you can put a little bit of noise on there to shake it up before it comes out, that's good. And then putting your map on here is really good as well. Okay, so that will really help you with your simulations there. All right, so now let me see if I start to, let's go to the emitter. And so we haven't done any keyframing. So keyframing here is like pretty much in any other program that you use. So if we set this as a start at 0, and if we click here, it's going to set a keyframe on that value. And it turns red, just like in Maya, red is for keyframes. So if we go a few frames up, so let's go 15 frames, and we turn this up to, let's say, 40, and we set another keyframe. Okay. Now, if you want to actually see the animation curve, if you right-click on here and go to Edit Curve, it'll bring up your curve editor, and it's a linear curve. If you want to flatten the start and end for a little ease in and ease out, you just select it and then hit this button right here, and there you can do it. And once if you keyframe a bunch of stuff, it'll all be listed in here. Right now, this is the only keyframe we have, so it's on speed. And then, of course, you can change the values right here. So X and Y values, just like in the graph editor in Maya, so you can change where all these things are just by punching numbers in right there. Okay, you can even add keys in there as needed. So for this, let's see what we got. So if I hit, I'm going to save here, reset, and then simulate. We're going to start real low, and then it's going to pick up really fast because it's 15 frames. So that's going to start to pick up speed right there. Okay, so again, if we go in here, edit curve, and say we want this to happen at 30, that's going to move it to 30, and this is just Maya navigation. It's a little weird. I like to use the mouse. Okay, there it added another point. What did I do? Oh, it's just control click will add points, right? And then you can grab points and move them around like this, so you can increase and decrease. So let's see over 30 frames what that's going to look like. I'm sure it's going to be interesting. And then you can take your let's see, our tangents. There we go. You got to turn on you got to set them to Bezier first, and then you should be able to grab them just like that. Oops. And why are you doing that? Okay, there we go. If you want, let me see. So you can have things loop, just like in Maya, you can set loops and stuff. So last node behavior is the last key, and you can tell it to loop. So it'll just repeat the motion over and over again if that's what you want. Okay, so let's see what this does here. I'm sure it's going to be horrible, but let's see. Okay, so whoa. Okay, so again, once we really start to turn up, and then you can see it comes back. Once we really start to turn up the speed on that emitter, we start to get back this really crazy sort of planes of fluid. And usually the best way to fix that is to increase your resolution so that you have enough fluids to fill in those gaps. And then you could also turn up the noise factor here. So you can see just by keyframing. And then to remove all the keyframing on there, just hit remove curve. It's going to turn that off. So, and then we can set this back to, say, 25 or whatever it was. Okay, so you can keyframe, and anything with that circle can be keyframed. So, I mean, if you're used to keyframing stuff, this is pretty straightforward. All right, so now we're back to what we had here. Okay, so that is keyframing, and I use this a lot just to make things interesting. You could, like for example, let me reset here. So if we take our emitter and we want to rotate it in the, looks like the Y value, so rotation. Now, if you have a compound value like rotation, which is X, Y, and Z, and you just want to key one of them, you got to open up here, and then you can key just that one setting. So I think this is Y, right? Yep. So if I key my Y rotation, let's put it at 0 here. Okay, hit enter, and then go to, I don't know, frame 100 or something like that, and do a 360 or something, and then set that key. So basically we're just spinning, and again, this is designed to help shake up the water a little bit. I don't know if it's gonna be, I don't know if it's gonna be too noticeable, but hey, let's give it a shot and see. So we'll run it, and you may not even really notice it too much, but it probably will have some effect. Okay, so it's probably too slow for one. 360 and 100 frames is probably kind of slow. So let's go back to frame 100 and set this to maybe 720. Or let's just make it a cool 1000. So 1000 degrees, and I think it automatically updates. Let's just check the curve now. I can't go to the curve here. I got to go to the curve here. Edit curve. We want Y, and this value is 360. So it's still at 360. So you do have to set a curve, or just type it in here. There we go. So now let's simulate. Oh, let's go back to reset and simulate from there. So who knows? It might help shake up the water. I notice some of these shapes are a little bit nicer now. So there you go. You kind of have to art direct your water and make it look good to you, because you don't want to just use the basic settings straight out of the box. You want to add to it and customize it and make it interesting. So doing little things like that, I think, adds to it. So that, it's entirely up to you, of course. Let's try a higher resolution. No, maybe not 1000, but 100. I'm gonna save. Okay, and I'm gonna run this, and we'll see how this looks. So we have a few more particles. Oh, we have 24,000. So 24,000 again is really not much at all. So let's go. I got to be careful here, not going up too high too quick. So let's save and run this. And you can see we're at 36,000. So this thing, you could actually punch it up quite a bit. So next thing we need is wet, dry textures. So if you click on the road here and scroll down to texture, there's a wet, dry texture. So I'm going to turn this on. It defaults to 256. Just for testing it in the viewport, I have it set to 1024, so 1K. The textures that I textured on this plane here, I did those in Substance Painter, and these are at 4K. So eventually, once I'm doing my final sim, I'm going to turn these up to about 4K. Okay, so these are all the different attributes here. Again, if you hit F1, and you can go to more info, and it'll tell you exactly what to do. Wet dry map creation. So it'll give you exactly what all these things do. So feel free to read through these to figure out what all the different settings do. There we go. So resolution is obviously the map size. If you want to blur this, because the way that it generates the map, in fact, let me just go ahead and show you. The way that it generates the maps is anytime a particle touches that surface, it leaves a mark, basically. So you can see right there, when you turn on the wet dry map, the surface turns black, and then you can see what's happening here. Now, this is very low resolution, partly because I'm at 1024, and partly because my simulation is still pretty low quality wise. So we get a lot of pixelation, but you get the idea. Um, so with the different settings here, like filter loops, you can have it blur. Then filter strength is how much it gets blurred. You know, you probably want to use this quite a bit because you don't want to see individual particle marks really. Um, so then pixel strength, you can specify the spot's brightness. So if it's 255, which it is here, then it's completely white. So you'll get a black map. These parts here, which are orange, are actually going to be white in the maps because the pixel strength is set to 255. And then aging is if you want the things to sort of dry as time goes on. So if you imagine a beach where the water washes in and the sand looks wet, and then almost immediately the water just sort of sinks into the sand and it looks like it's drying. So that's what the aging is for. So if you splash something but yet you want it to dry over time, that's what you have. So at a value of 0, it means that whatever it is will stay wet. And then the more you turn this up, the more it'll dry. In our case, the water is pretty much sitting. It's not going somewhere else. So really, you're not going to get much drying anyway. Okay, so that's what all these settings here do. Okay, so there. Now you'll notice as I run this back, it did not cache the wet dry texture. And that's because it's not on by default in Export Central. So if we hit F12, okay, and then this is for the road. So we want wet map texture to be turned on. Okay, so that's very important. And then you can pick a format. Let's see, there we go. Just double click in there. And usually I like TIFF. Honestly, I just use TIFFs for that. So that should be good. Only thing you got to be careful. Sometimes TIFFs will be created with some compression. It's actually not a big deal in this case. So we'll turn on the wet map texture. We'll do the same for the curbs because they likely going to touch the water. So let's go ahead, turn on wet map texture and double click here and go to TIFF. Okay, so hit done. So let's reset this now and select our curb, turn this on, and again, 1024 for testing purposes. Okay, and then again, it also turns black, and I'm going to save, and then and also if you want to see, so let's go back in here. So here it's going to tell you exactly where it's going to put in your scene directory in the images folder. These are folders that were created automatically by RealFlow, so that should be in there. If you want to put them somewhere else, you can maybe do a subfolder or change it all together. You can just type it in there. That's entirely up to you. Okay, so let's let's go ahead then. I save again and then simulate. And let's see. And my water is not working. Let's go back. Let's try again. Okay, so for some reason, don't know why this is with Diverso. I'm sure you've noticed by now that RealFlow is a little quirky, to put it mildly. So I'm going to just come in here. So when that happens, for some reason, if I turn off my video card, okay, now we crash. So I'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Dynamic software is very quirky. I think I'm going to start using that word. No, it's just the way it is. It's you're asking the computer to do a lot of things, and crashes are very common. I think the most stable dynamic software that I've used so far is Marvelous Designer. All the other stuff, it does crash, and it's just a reality. So, that's why if you've been paying attention, I have been saving a lot before I do anything. I'll hit save just to avoid these issues, because I can be back up and running pretty quickly. Okay, I've never had a RealFlow file crash and take the file with it and kill the file, so it's usually very quick to get back up and running. So Just keep that in mind. Okay, I'm going to stop this here, and if all my settings now, let me go back here. Did this save my? So I need to go into this directory and see if the texture, so let's go in here, and it was under images, and for some reason it's empty here. So let's look at this again here. Set it to TIFF, scene directory, images. So I don't know if this because it crashed on me or what. So I'm gonna run it again. So I have it check. Oh yeah, okay. I see the problem. So I totally, even though I checked wet map here, I totally did not check this, and that's annoying. It gets me every time, and I forget it. But so I got to do the same with the curbs then. So just because you have these sub objects, these sub list items here checked, it's not going to export them until you check this one too, and it gets me every time. But all right, let's try that again and hope we don't crash now. So I'm going to save again and then run it. Okay, so again, it's doing this. Who knows what that's all about, but it's probably going to crash. So what I usually do is if I come down here to options and I turn off my video card, hit OK, maybe run a couple frames of simulation, reset it, come back in here and turn it back on, it works. So I don't know why it's like that, but I'm going to turn this off. And are we crashing? Let's hit OK. Yep, and then we're going to crash. So that's an annoying thing, but you know, it is what it is. I can pretty quickly get back in the game, so I'm not even going to pause the video this time. I'm just going to show you how fast it is for me to get back because I did save right before that. So hopefully, so there's the file right there. And okay, let's just check F12 export central, and those are still checked. So let's hope that it works. And yeah, looks like we're working. And as it's doing that, you can see that those files are now coming in, and you can see that little white spot growing there as the simulation increases. Now obviously it's a very small part of the map because this whole thing is a 4K map, but you can see how that's working. So let's go ahead and stop this, and now you can see that as I scrub this, it's getting bigger and bigger and smaller. Okay, so that is how you want to set that up. Let's reset this, and let's animate this emitter again here. So I had to remove my animation. So at this frame, I'm going to set it to 0, and we're just going to slowly increase over, say, 100 frames to, let's go 8. Okay, and then let's make it interesting. Let's go in here, and I'm going to control click a couple times there, and let's lower this one, let's raise this one, maybe lower this one here, just to, so it's not this very linear constant increase here. And reset, and of course save and simulate. And okay, this is becoming annoying, but you get the idea. So let me spare you the restart again, and I'll be right back. All right, so now I have let it run a little bit here. I've got things to work. I've also just adjusted some of the wet map settings here. I upped the resolution to 2048. I tried it at 4K, but it was just taking too long. So basically, this is one of the images here. So this is what it puts out. It puts out black where there's no interaction with the water, and then white where there is. So this is a 2K texture right here. And of course, this is only taking up a small part. So that's one of the things you got to sort of keep in mind here, is that in order to get really nice resolution on your wet map here, you probably either going to have to use a bigger map, which is going to take much longer to simulate because it's a huge map, or set up your geometry in such a way that the parts that are going to get wet are, using a whole UV map, as much of a UV map as possible. In this, that was not really possible because these are really big pieces here. So, my water is only affecting this small part. So, trying to get a smaller piece of geometry that encompasses closer to where the wet map is going to result if at 2K. If this was bigger, I'd have much more resolution. But this should work. I think we'll be fine. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, so that's what we have right here. And then, of course, bear in mind that this geometry is not the original geometry of the road here, because remember I had to thicken it. But because I didn't, if I go back to Maya here, because I did not reproject or anything else, those UVs are just basically sitting. So let me go in my UV editor here. Those UVs are just sitting exactly on top of everything else. So that's fine. It'll still work. So don't worry too much about that. Okay, so this is what we have here. And so the next thing then is to simply turn up all the resolution and everything on the simulation and do a higher resolution simulation. Now, something that I keep forgetting to mention here is one way to speed up your, one way to speed up your simulations here is to simulate using the command line. Okay, so let's go ahead and reset here. And then if we come here to simulate, hit this little button, you see it says command line. So if we turn that on, and what that's going to do, cancel that. What that's going to do is instead of simulating in the view in the interface, where the interface has to be redrawn with every as you update, it's going to simulate in like a command line. So if I go ahead and hit simulate, you'll see now it brings up this window, and then it's going to tell you what frame it's on, and you can see that's frame 3. Notice how much faster it's going. That's because it's not having to update the interface. Okay, this and not only that, you can actually close RealFlow, and this will still go in and simulate. So this is actually really nice. It's going to make your simulations a whole lot faster. And then the way to check how they're going is to, while this is running, I don't have to actually turn that off. I can come in here and hit this button here, and it's going to load up all my frames so that I can now check this and see how it's doing, right? So this is what it looks like, but it's going to simulate outside of the interface because it's going to be much faster. So definitely turn that on there and use that because it does make quite a bit of difference, especially when you're doing final simulations. This is fine doing it in the viewport just to see, but when you're doing serious final simulations, this is the way to go. Now, what I don't know, and I might as well just test it, is we've been having some of these issues with the Diverso here. I don't know if those will manifest in the command line either. So what I'm going to do then is, and by the way, the reason that my water is, I actually adjusted that animation curve. So let's go into the emitter, let's go into the animation curve, right click, edit curve. I actually put in some more points and really increase this one right here so that we would get some nice splashing of the fluid through here. And you can see how that wet map is working. And this is really nice right here because it comes back and then splashes again, and we get this really nice wet map right there. And because I adjusted the filter loop, so how many iterations of blurring are we doing? I told it 3. And filter strength is how strong of a blur. I had it at 0.75. It was a little too soft and too strong, so I dropped down to 0.45. And then I told it aging of 5. I don't think I'm really seeing much of an effect on that. No, actually, you see it. You see it's sort of fading right there. So it is actually working. So if you watch those dots, you see that those little tails basically of the streaks sort of fade away because it is drying slightly. Now you can play with that and see what values you like. If it's a really hot day, in your scene, then you'd probably want to increase that. Um, if you're in a really dry environment, so that's what we get. And, do whatever you can to get an interesting simulation. When the water gets splashy like that, that always looks good. Okay, we get these little uh, tendrils of water going on around here. That's really nice. That's really nice stuff. So definitely play with some of those keyframes, right? In the speed, you can keyframe a little bit of wobble in the emitter with the rotations. Have it wobble very slightly. You don't want it to be too much, but you can have it wobble a little bit um, to get that water to not just come out in a perfectly straight line. You want to have it shake a little bit there. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can increase your quality of your simulation. Okay, so that is the command line. So right under here again, turn on command line, and then we got command line options. For right now, you don't really have to worry about these, but when we start using caches and things, then we can start playing with these. But right now, it's just going to take all its settings from the scene. Whatever your scene settings are, it's going to take from there. So we don't really need to mess around in there. Okay, so that's where that is. Um, and we can reset here. And then the next thing actually I want to show you, let's bring this back, is meshing. So again, when you want to finalize your simulation, you have to create a mesh around your particles. So right here under the mesh, now this mesh is going to be pretty lousy because I'm using a very low setting here. But under mesh, if you come in here, there's different kinds of mesh. I like to use a particle mesh VDB. You'll see that it's going to connect it to your domain automatically. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my domain and I'm just going to hide the particles. They're still there, they're just hidden. And I do that so I can see the mesh when it gets built. So if we right click on our mesh and go to mesh and build, it's going to go and it might take, oh no, this was pretty quick. So it's that quick because it's low quality. It's a low quality mesh. So it comes in wireframe, hit D once is hard normals, D twice is soft normals, and that's what we get. Now obviously this is not very nice, but you'd have to turn up the settings there to get it the way you want. So this is what it looks like. I'm going to hit D again to go back to wireframe. You can see that because this is a low quality mesh, there's a lot of space between it and the particles, and you can see that in our web map here. So that's one of the things you got to take into account. You got to make sure that that mesh is hugging the particles a little tighter. So in the mesh settings, you got auto polygon size, which is off by default. So it allows you to set how small your polygons are going to be. And right now we're at a 0.05. So let's try a 0.025 to do that. So we can just rebuild our mesh. So go back, right click, go to mesh, go to build again. And you see that our particles, our polygons are smaller, but really didn't change much of anything. That's because we need a higher resolution simulation. We could also try turn on auto polygon size. If you're going to do this, I would really insist that you save. Okay. So and then another thing, you can see that this actually goes beneath. So this mesh does not collide with anything. It's not dynamic. It just follows the particles. That's all it does. And because the way meshes are, because the way they wrap around the particles, you get this sort of rounded bottom on there. So this is actually fine. When it intersects the ground, this is what I actually want, because water does not do this. It does not get rounded like that. It actually has a very flat bottom if you look at how water sits. So the floor is actually going to cut through that and make it look a little bit better. But we're still very blobby. Okay, so one way to get rid of that is turn on mesh filter. Okay, you can turn that on, and if you hit F1 again and go to more info, you can come in here. Let's see, and find some of these settings here. So mesh filter. Okay, so thinning is overall quality, and it'll tell you all these different things. Relaxation, it stretches and sharpens the mesh at edges, so it reduces a lot of this sort of blobby, round, metaball looking geometry here. So that's going to add to that. Then what do we have here? Tension. So that you can see what that does there, and then steps you can play with there. So again, That's what I like about RealFlow. It's really easy to find help on what each of these settings does. So I'm gonna move this over here. So I'm gonna go up a frame. I'm gonna go to the next frame, to frame 87, and with mesh filter on, I'm gonna rebuild this mesh. And the reason I go to a different frame is so I can compare the two frames. So that one, now it might not be that, but you can see just if you watch these blobs right in here, if as I go from frame to frame, you see with filter on, they shrink down a little bit. With filter off, they're really big. So once you have a higher simulation, that's really going to help. And the default value is actually not too bad, but you can play with the other values if you so desire. Okay, so that's how you would mesh that. And if we hit F12 to go into Export Central again, you'll see that the particle mesh VDB1 is right there. Now, usually you probably want to name this, so name it, water mesh or whatever, and then it'll put the name in there. And if you open this up, you'll see it's outputting it as an alembic sequence. ABC is alembic. And that's fine. What I don't like about alembic is you have to stitch you have to stitch them together. And if you got a really long simulation, I find that alembic tends to crash a lot if you have to stitch a long sequence. So basically, you're basically combining all the cache files into one. And I've never really had very good luck with that. So what I prefer to do is turn it into a bin sequence. This is a RealFlow format here, .bin. Now, if you're on a Mac and you do not have the RealFlow plugin, then you're not going to be able to do this. You're going to have to use the alembic mesh sequence. Okay, so just bear that in mind. But if you do have the plugin, by all means use this. I find that it works better. There's no stitching involved. You just give Maya the sequence of bin files, and it'll bring them in per frame as needed. So as you scrub through the animation, I find that works very well. So that's what I prefer to use. Okay, so that's just one of those things that you got to come into Export Central to adjust certain things to get that to work for you. Now, again, here's our domain. Again, probably want to name this so it's not just DY domain 1. And again, here, if you wanted alembic files there, you can use those. But again, you got to stitch those together. So RPC tends to work just fine for me. Okay, so let's hit done here. And I think that's all for this video. I'm going to run the simulation at a high resolution here. It might take a night to get done at the level that I want it to do, and then we'll come back and I'm going to export all the wet maps and everything, and then we can go ahead and take all of this into Maya for setup and rendering. Okay, so I will see you in the next video. Bye.